Hello and welcome to the I Hit Drums podcast with me, Mark, your teacher for this series. You can keep up to date with everything I Hit Drums by going to the website ihitdrums.co.uk, where you can also find the book that we're working through just now, titled Intermediate 1. Today's lesson focus is going to be on accents, in particular hi-hat accents, and once you start working with accents on the hi-hat, it becomes very easy to transform basic grooves into something a lot more musical that has a lot more movement going on. So if you already have the book, let's go to page 37, where we're going to look at exercise 4.1, without and with accents. This first exercise is actually very straightforward. We just have a bar of eighth notes on the hi-hat, followed by a bar of eighth notes on the hi-hat with accents. All this is designed to do is to get you used to moving between a normal hit and a louder hit. So in reference to those previous dynamic markers that we've talked about in the past, try and play the first bar mezzo forte, so that's the MF marking, which means medium loud. And then try and play the second bar forte, or even very loud, FF. So try and make sure that those medium volume and loud volume hits actually sound different. If they're too close in volume, it might actually be hard to tell them apart. If you are finding this to be the case, rather than go even harder on those loud strikes, try and drop your quieter hits a little bit, as most beginner and intermediate drummers tend to play quite loud anyway and can often overhit, so try and drop the volume of the quieter bar. Once you've tried that exercise, we're going to start looking at exercise 4.2 with a bit more detail, as this exercise moves from a loud to a quiet, from a loud to a quiet, and so on. So we want to make sure that we can control those hits as we move from one to the other, back and forth. And this means we're going to look a bit more closely at a downstroke and an upstroke. This is something I learned from Bruce Becker. He's a very good educator, and if I'm totally honest, his teaching really improved my hand technique. So still on page 37, we have a section labelled the downstroke. Rather than thinking of a loud strike, try and think of this as the downstroke. So you're going to start with the hi-hat stick held above the hi-hat, and all you do for the downstroke is just drop the stick onto the hi-hat. And it's really just gravity, it's the weight of the arm that is dropping this stick. You don't have to necessarily add a lot of force, you're just lifting the stick and then dropping it. And that will give you that loud strike. And it's actually the stick height which creates this loud strike. If the stick is coming from a higher distance, it's going to have a bigger impact when it strikes the surface. And the opposite is true on page 38 when we start looking at the upstroke. We actually start with the stick very close to the hi-hat, and all we're going to do is just drop the stick very gently and then lift the wrist. And you can put some bend in that wrist because you actually want to move back to that original starting position where you had the hand ready for the downstroke. And because with the upstroke, the stick is starting very close to the hi-hats, it's very difficult to make this loud. So that's actually helping you generate a quiet stroke, which you want for the upstroke. So rather than thinking loud, quiet, try think down, up, down, up. So let's do a little practice run of this movement. Have your right hand over the hi-hat, with the stick about 30 to 40 centimeters above the hi-hat. And now just relax the arm and let it drop on the hi-hat. Now try not lift the stick once you've done this hit, just let the tip of the stick hover over the hi-hat. From this hovering position, just relax the wrist so that the stick just drops and gives it a little tap. And then as you do this, it's kind of one movement, you do the little tap and put a bend in the wrist and lift it back up. So as you're actually dropping the stick to do that small tap, you're going to be putting a slight bend in the wrist. So just continue that bend as you lift the stick back up, and then you're just going to return the stick to its original position, ready for the next downstroke. So let's try exercise 4.2 now. This is accenting the quarter note. And because those downstrokes, those louder strikes, are going to be on the numbers, this gives us those louder accented quarter notes. Ready? Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Once you've tried this a few times, see if you can add some bass drum and snare drum to this pattern. And this is what we have on page 39 in exercise 4.3. So we're just going to play the money beat, which you've played before, but we're going to see if we can add that accented quarter note pattern on the hi-hat. Now this isn't too bad to do because all of those bass and snare drum points are going to be falling as the hand is coming down on the hi-hat. So as the bass drum foot goes down, the right hand comes down. As the snare drum hand comes down, that right hand's coming down again on the hi-hat. Let's give it a try. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Exercise 4.4 continues this progression of using the accented quarter note hi-hat pattern, but with a selection of grooves. It's worth saying at this point that any bass drum that is falling on an and position, that's when the hand is actually going to be going up away from the hi-hat. You might find this a little bit tricky at first because the hand is going to be moving upwards as the bass drum goes down. So that opposite direction can be a little tricky at first. These exercises are something you can practice independently, so we're not going to go over these just now. And you might find these exercises alone are enough for you to practice on for the following week. Once you've done these though, you can move on to the next bunch of exercises. We're going to have the same selection of grooves, only this time we're actually reversing that sticking pattern on the hi-hat. So rather than accenting the quarter note, we're going to be accenting the offbeat. And the offbeat, in case you don't know, is all of those and positions. So for exercise 4.5, the sticking pattern is going to be exactly the same as we did before, only we're going to start with the upstroke. So begin by having the stick hovering over the hi-hat nice and close, and then you're going to drop the tip of the stick as you bend the wrist and raise the arm, and then you're going to put the stick into that original starting position, and from there, drop the hand down onto the hi-hat. So rather than being a loud, quiet pattern, we're now going to have a quiet, loud. And remember, try and think of this as up, down, because it's really the movement and the stick height especially, which is going to allow you to have those different dynamics without using a lot of energy. And again, this is something Bruce Becker teaches very well. It's all about being fluid on the kit without having to use extra amounts of energy to get the sound you want. So let's try exercise 4.5, accenting the offbeat. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so now let's see if we can add that offbeat accented hi-hat to the money beat groove that we tried previously. Now this time it's going to be a bit trickier because all of those bass drum and snare drum hits are falling on the quarter note, and all of those positions is where the hand's going to be going up for the upstroke. And that means that the bass drum is going down as the hand is going up, and this creates that opposite direction that we've talked about before, which is a little bit trickier. Let's give it a try. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so you probably found that a little bit trickier because of that opposite direction of movement. But what I will say is that when you get to exercise 4.7 and you've got those bass drum hits falling on an and position, also now known as an offbeat position, those hits are now going to be easier because any bass drum falling on an and is now going to be falling with a downstroke. So as I said before, you might just want to focus on exercises 4.2, 4.3 and 4.4 initially. That in itself might be a week's worth of practice. The following week, you can focus on exercises 4.5, 4.6 and 4.7. I'd much rather you spent a good amount of time on each of these and get really comfortable with that hi-hat movement rather than trying to just cram it all into a week. Because this movement is so important to your development of groove playing. So make sure you give it the time it needs. And for that reason, we're going to leave this episode here today. If you don't yet have the book, you can find it on my website, ihitdrums.co.uk. If you're just starting out on the drums or you know someone who's starting out on the drums, then by subscribing to the website, you can get access to a free Groove Starter Pack. Be sure to follow this podcast so that you receive regular updates on new episodes. And if you're finding this useful, please leave a review and please recommend it to people that you know that are also getting started out on the drums. If you have any questions and want to get in touch, there's a contact page on my website, so send me a message and I'll get back to you. But until next time, enjoy.